Hello everyone, good evening. Before I begin, I'd like to do a quick activity with you all. It's pretty straightforward, just raise your hand if this applies to you. Who here has taken a course on world history and learned about ancient India and ancient Indian society? Don't be shy, raise your hand. Okay, almost every one of you. Good. Now, who here in their course learned about advanced ancient Indian medicine? One of you, all right. Who here in their course learned about ancient Indian contributions to math and science? A few of you. Now, who knows about the caste system? All of you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sakethram Desabhotla, and I will be speaking about historical distortion pertaining to ancient India and its society. Distortion is defined as a change, twist, or exaggeration that makes something appear different from what it really is. It is a misrepresentation. And when this happens in a historical context, it is especially damaging because a culture's history is a culture's identity. And when you twist a culture's history and throw it back at the individuals who identify with that culture, it makes them feel ashamed of their heritage. And many Hindu kids of Indian origin, including myself, have felt this. We're learning about ancient India and its society from a Western lens. In our world history course, we learn about the great schools of Sumer set up in the 2000s BCE, where students, boys, would go and learn the art of being a scribe. And yet, when we talk about ancient India, there is no mention of advanced schools, a student life that began at the age of 3 in a ceremony known as Aksharabhyasa, where the student would write their name in rice. We didn't learn about the fact that at the age of 8, a student would go and live with their teacher in the middle of the forest, surrounded by nature, to learn grammar, the vedas, mathematics, some science, and even develop logic and reasoning skills through discussion and debate. And this education was not just for boys. A verse in the Atharva Veda, one of the Vedas are authoritative texts of Hinduism, states that a youthful girl should only get married after obtaining a suitable education. We learn about the great center of learning in world history, in Baghdad, the House of Wisdom, set up in the 9th century CE by Caliph Harun al-Rashid, where works from all over the world were compiled and translated into Arabic. And yet, we don't learn about great centers of learning in ancient India, like the Takshashila University, set up in the 1st millennium BCE, which attracted students from all across the world, including places like China, Persia, Japan, and Greece. We didn't learn about the Nalanda University, where Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi came in the 7th century CE and took back over 600 works to China. We learn about great pieces of architecture in other civilizations, like the great ziggurats of Sumer, built to honor the gods. We learn about the towering pyramids of Egypt that were built to revere the great pharaohs and queens, messengers of the gods. Both of these structures point upwards, a symbol of divinity, and both are in their own right amazing architectural feats. And yet we don't learn about the magnificent structures of ancient India, like the ancient Hindu temples with extremely intricate carvings. Ancient Indian masons were extremely skilled, and yet we don't give them any credit. We don't learn about amazing ancient Indian astronomers like Aryabhata, who calculated the orbital periods of planets so close to the modern day accepted value, only differing in the decimal places. We don't learn about advanced ancient Indian medicine like Ayurveda, which details cures for many diseases like cough, the common cold, abscesses, cataracts, kidney stones, and even more. We don't learn about how Ayurvedic texts detail cures for these diseases through changes in diet, medicine, and yes, even surgery. We don't learn about ancient Indian contributions to math and science, like the invention of the number 0, which paved the way for the decimal number system. We don't learn about our modern-day numerical values, which were derived in ancient India and propagated to the world by Arab merchants, hence Hindu-Arabic numerals. We don't learn about advanced geometry, like the geometry detailed in the Surma Sutras, which are ancient texts written in the 1st millennium BCE, which designate the geometry required for algebra construction, including the Pythagorean triplets. My point is, we learn amazing things about these different cultures in different time periods, about their architecture and their centers of learning and education, and yet when we talk about ancient India, there is no mention of innovation. We talk about the horrors of sati and caste. And even these are severe exaggerations of what they really were. I will begin by talking about sati. Sati is defined by mainstream historians today as a Hindu cultural practice that required a wife to throw herself on her husband's flaming funeral pyre once he died. This practice is also known as self-immolation. I would like to point out some inaccuracies in this definition. First off, it is not and was not a Hindu practice. In order for something to be a Hindu practice, it has to be encouraged by Hindu scriptures. Whereas the Vedas, one of the most significant texts of Hinduism, state this, that after a woman's husband passes away, she should rejoin the world of the living. They encourage a woman to move on, and they make no injunction of self-immolation. The Aranyaka, or texts that detail the meaning behind different Hindu rituals, including that of a funeral ritual, specifically state that after the death of a husband and after the funeral ritual, a widow and their family would leave the procession hoping to move on. They make no account of the wife burning herself on the husband's funeral pyre, showing that sati was not a common Hindu practice in ancient times. Next, another inaccuracy in the definition is the use of the word required. This practice was most definitely not required. In the Hindu epic, the Ramayana, after King Dasharatha dies, the king dies, his wives do not commit sati. They do not self-immolate themselves. If sati was really a required Hindu practice, these women who were staunchly Hindu would not have hesitated before jumping into the fire, and yet they didn't even commit sati, showing that it was definitely not a Hindu practice. In the Mahabharata, after King Pandu dies, one of his wives does not commit sati. She remains alive. His other wife does, but she does so because she felt that she was responsible for his death. She does so out of her own volition. No one forced her into it. This shows that even when sati did happen in ancient times, it was due to an individual's choice, and not because they were forced into it. And even when it did happen in ancient times, there are multiple accounts of people, society, and relatives of a widow telling her not to, discouraging her from committing sati. This shows that sati was definitely not encouraged by Hindu society, and thus was not a Hindu practice. And the last myth that is inferred by the word a practice is that it was extremely prevalent, and this cannot be further from the truth. In ancient times, as stated, it was very rare. In the Middle Ages, in a period from 700 to 1600 CE, a span of 900 years, we have less than 100 cases of sati based on the record we have. On the contrary, there are close to 45,000 cases of suicide in the United States every year. From a later period, from 1818 to 1829, less than 0.00001% of the population committed sati annually. To contrast that, the suicide rates of America and Japan are 0.013% and 0.019% respectively. And just as we can't say that suicide is not an inherent part of American and Japanese culture, we cannot say that sati was an inherent part of ancient Indian Hindu culture. I will proceed to talk about the caste system, which is the focus of education on ancient Indian society. The caste system is defined by mainstream historians as the rigid Hindu system of hereditary and social divisions based on caste, which is social class. We are taught that there are 4 classes or castes, and that in order of importance and purity and power they are Brahmins at the top. Brahmins are the educators and priests. Kshatriyas, second. Kshatriyas are warriors in the ruling class. Vaishyas, third. Vaishyas are businessmen and merchants. And the Shudras, last. Shudras are the laborers. We are taught that one's work is determined by the social class they are born into. If you are born into a family of laborers, we are taught that you had to be a laborer and that there was no other choice for you. And we are taught that education was only limited to the top 3 classes, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas. This sounds terrible, doesn't it? Does it? Is it accurate? Let's take a look at the Vedas again. In the Vedas, there is a verse that describes social classes. And this specifically states that in the body of society, the head is the Brahmana. And this makes sense because Brahmins are educated, and so they are the seat of knowledge, just like the head is for the body. This verse states that Kshatriyas, or warriors, are symbolized by the arms, because when a body is fighting, its arms are used to protect the body. And just like that, Kshatriyas, kings and warriors, had the duty to protect their society. This verse further states that Vaishyas and Shudras are symbolized by the thighs and the feet, respectively. And this is because a society is built on the foundation of its laborers and of its businesses and services. Without these, society cannot survive. This description is metaphorical and not literal. It doesn't state that because the Shudras are the feet, they're the lowest. Rather, it states that just as all the different components of a body must work together for the body to be successful, all different parts of society must work in harmony and in tandem to make sure society is harmonious. Patrick Alden, he's a professor of Sanskrit and Indian religions, and after his study in the Dharmashastras, these texts detailing what's right and wrong in specific periods of time in Hindu history, states that there is no mention in the Dharmashastras of a specific caste or class being impure. This shows us that systematically there was no looking down on a specific group of people because of the work they did or the family they were born into. Along with this, the narrative that we're taught that only the top 3 classes got an education is also false. In the 20th century, a historian named Parampal used British records of Indian schools that they got in the 18th century when they first came to India. He used these in his book to talk about Indian education. And in these records, we see that close to 60%, more than half of all students in village schools were of Shudra origin. They were the children of laborers. They were definitely not excluded from the education system because of their class. And finally, we also see that the narrative that we've been given, that caste was rigid and based on birth, is also inaccurate and bears no fruit. A verse in the Bhagavad Gita, spoken by Lord Krishna himself, specifically states that I am the creator of these 4 classes, and I created them based on their actions and qualities. Here, Lord Krishna himself is specifically stating that one's class can be determined by their actions and not their birth or not their skin color. And we see multiple examples of this throughout Hindu history. A great example is Aryabhata, the famous astronomer mathematician, considered to be one of the most prominent mathematicians of all time. He made those astronomical calculations I talked about earlier. He was not born into a family of educators. Vishwamitra, considered by the gods themselves to be one of the most powerful sages of all of Hindu history, was not born a Brahmin. Vedavyasa, the most significant Indian sage of all time, arguably, he compiled the 4 Vedas. He was not born a Brahmin. These 3 people were not born as educators, and yet through their pursuit of knowledge they became Brahmins and they were revered as Brahmins. They're not looked down upon because they didn't come from a clan of Brahmins. The Maratha Peshwas are another great example. They are a clan of warriors in northern India. And at one point they had Brahmin ancestry. But because someone decided to do things a little differently, they became a powerful clan of warriors, equal to all the Kshatriyas out there. This shows us that the narratives we've been introduced to on sati and the caste system are inaccurate. This is heavy historical distortion. Not detailing the great advancements in ancient Indian society is further historical distortion. And they give rise to the view that ancient Indian society was backward. And they make Hindu Indian kids reject their culture as they feel it is backward. It makes them feel ashamed of their heritage and where they came from. And we don't want that. This is the society most people see. An ancient Indian society marred by the evils of sati and the caste system. I urge you tonight, ladies and gentlemen, not to think of these when you think of ancient India, but think about ancient India and all its contributions. An ancient India that put education at its highest pedestal. An ancient India with contributions to science and technology. An ancient India which came up with the number 0 and other mathematical advancements. An ancient India with beautiful architecture towering to the sky. An ancient India with great educational institutes. An ancient India with advanced medicine and surgery. I urge you tonight, ladies and gentlemen, to think of these when you think of ancient India and understand it the way it is meant to be understood, holistically. Thank you. Before I step off, I'd like to thank the members of IHAR, the Indian History Awareness and Research Organization. They've been extremely helpful in helping me understand ancient Indian society, especially Rajvedam and Sahana Singh for their tireless patience in helping me understand my heritage. Thank you.